Changing minds, changing lives. The Liaison and Diversion Diaries. A podcast run by frontline workers discussing all things criminal justice in relation to multiple and complex needs. Our Liaison and Diversion Service supports people with vulnerabilities in custody, courts, prison and the community, helping to bridge the gaps for people accessing services. We are a service of the Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust. Tune in for our monthly podcast where we will feature guests from all walks of life discussing issues affecting us in the here and now.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Changing Minds, Changing Lives, the Liaison and Diversion Diaries. Today we'll be looking at our team over in custody, the atmosphere at Perry Bar, the types of service users and the support we offer. As usual, we are joined by a few members of the L&D team, so can you take a moment to introduce yourselves?
My name's Daniel. I am one of the practitioners in the Perry Bar Custody Suite.
I'm Janine. I'm the custody lead for the service.
I'm Jess. I'm one of the practitioners in custody.
I'm Laura, one of the practitioners in custody.
Fabulous. So leading on to my first question, what does a typical day look like in custody?
So I'll kick off. So there really isn't kind of a typical day in custody. That every day, I suppose, is really different dependent on who is in custody. So it usually starts off with us kind of having a look at who's in the cells and us kind of cross-referencing their details against kind of health databases that we've got access to. So for Aerotrust, that's Rio. For Forward Thinking Birmingham, that's Care Notes. And then looking at kind of how they've recently been presenting, if they are open services, and then also looking at how they've been whilst in the custody environment. And as a collective group, we will discuss everybody that's in custody that we've kind of looked at and make a decision on who we offer an assessment based on a multitude of vulnerabilities that kind of the service caters for, really. I don't know if anybody else has got anything they want to...
I think the only other thing is just that anyone that's been seen the day before by our team will just kind of look and see what the outcome of the case is. And if appropriate, we'll get in touch with teams and notify them that they've been released, or if they're going to court, we'll make sure that the court report, if it's been completed, is sent to the magistrates, just so that it kind of tells the judge a little bit more about them.
Yeah, and I suppose it's not just about kind of who we would offer a face-to-face assessment about. It might be that there's someone in custody that's already getting some support in the community. They're already engaging kind of well in that package of care that's on offer to them, and it might be that we kind of just liaise with those professionals or that service just to notify them that someone they're working with is in custody, and it might be that they can't make an appointment that's due for today, or just to kind of update them if it's kind of a risk issue or anything like that. And likewise, if we can see that someone's got an appointment coming up for tomorrow, we'll go and let the person in custody know that that's happening, just to make sure they're aware and they're still happy to attend. It's a multitude of kind of liaisons and assessments that we would encounter and deal with.
Okay. What kind of interaction do you have with the police on a day-to-day, being a NHS service?
So I think on a few levels, so we will have a look at the systems we've got and give the police some information to help them form their risk assessments, help them care for the person whilst they're in custody, and then it may be letting them know what our plan is. So if we've seen them and we've put a plan in place when they're released, just so the police are aware what support's going to be available to them once they leave custody.
Yeah, I think we've got a really open door policy, so police in terms of custody staff will come and kind of knock on their door and ask us questions or seek support in something that they're dealing with, but likewise investigation officers will come in and discuss the case and how someone's presented an interview and kind of flag that individual up to us, but also seek advice if someone is getting some support in the community for, say, a drug addiction or alcohol addiction, and just ask if we can kind of look at putting some support in place or get numbers and leaflets for services that are in community that they can give to people that they're dealing with as well. I think we've got really good links with the police and custody staff. Kind of pre-COVID, we were meeting and offering training around our service and a broad sense of kind of mental health and learning disabilities, and that was really successful. We kind of knew recruits and people that were coming to work in custody for the first time. Obviously, things have taken a backward step in COVID, but I think it's on the agenda once everything gets back to a degree of normality that we can kind of pick that process up again.
And what would you say the atmosphere is like in custody?
Changeable. Yeah, I don't think there's a typical day, and I think it depends on sometimes the severity of people that are in custody and the risk that those people present with, or the offences that those people are in with. But generally,
it's quite positive. I think it's very similar to kind of a ward environment. Some days on a ward feel a little bit more stressful than others, and I think, like Janine said, that's the mix of people that's in, the mix of staffing that are available maybe, and other kind of factors that are going on. I suppose as a liaison and diversion team, we're quite lucky that we've got our own little atmosphere, I suppose, in our office, that although we are part of the custody team, we're separate from that as well.
Yeah.
So we do have kind of a little bit of space to be able to go and reflect on things that are going on our own, really.
What kind of agencies and other services do you come across in the custody block?
In the custody block, so there's the drug and alcohol addiction team, who are called Cranston. So they're based in the custody block. There is the custody nurses, so they're under a company called Mountain Healthcare, and they're like the sort of the general nurses, and sometimes there'll be a doctor as part of their team as well, and they'll sort of see people for sort of physical health reasons and that kind of thing.
That's the thing. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, the only other people that I can kind of think of is sometimes people under 18 or those with kind of identified vulnerabilities will use appropriate adults, and sometimes that isn't kind of carers or family members, and that is still from an appropriate adult scheme, which tends to be the same kind of group of people. So we've kind of formed quite good relationships with them, that they will even kind of come to us and raise kind of concerns about people that they're supporting, because they're aware of our service and are aware of like the vulnerabilities that we support. So they're another agency that we kind of have a lot to do with, really.
Yeah, and I suppose on the back of that, I suppose solicitors, although, you know, that's different people for everybody's got kind of an individual. We've still had like a number of solicitors that have knocked the door and flagged concerns or asked questions, and sometimes that's always not kind of a positive, really. I think a lot of the time we've had to kind of explain that just because someone's got, I don't know, a vulnerability, they're still able to kind of be processed through the criminal justice route with additional help or with additional support being put in place kind of once they leave custody. So I think that hasn't been, if I can think of examples that aren't great in terms of working with partnerships, that's probably my only one. I think we do a lot of explaining ourselves and our decision making to solicitors, but again, that's few and far between. I don't think it's a regular thing that happens. But
and I suppose we've kind of also not covered that, although we're not a mental health team, we work closely with Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Trust, like the wider kind of like teams within that, so home treatment teams, bed management, community mental health teams, and also social services for safeguarding concerns for children or adults, and also kind of like the AMPs. So if someone is presenting as potentially needing admission to hospital, we work with them quite closely.
Ooh. Reflecting on your team then, what kind of specialisms do you have within your team that allow you to see people and recognise their vulnerabilities?
Ooh, so we are made up of a multitude of professionals. So I'm a mental health nurse, Dan's a mental health nurse,
yes,
and Sally is. And then we've got, have I missed anyone? Amelia and Danielle, and then we've got Jess, who's an LD nurse, and Laura, who's a speech and language therapy. So I think it might be boys. Oh, Thea, she's a social worker.
Sorry, Thea.
Sorry, Thea. But it might be worth kind of Laura and Jess just explaining a little bit about more of their speciality rather than me, I think.
Okay, so I'm a learning disability nurse, so I take the lead on offering any additional training to the other practitioners about learning disabilities, and helping kind of those individuals be identified, because unfortunately research kind of shows that there's a lot of people with learning disabilities that are missed in the criminal justice system, and obviously because of that vulnerability they've got other additional needs that need to be kind of looked at and kind of considered going through the custody process. So yeah, we've got links with the Learning Disability Community team through Birmingham Community Healthcare Trust, which we work with quite closely, so we can refer in and get additional support there.
So I'm a speech and language therapist by background, and a bit like Jess, I think the way I sort of look at it is thinking about screening and identifying individuals with speech and language communication needs. So similarly to people with learning disabilities, there's a high prevalence of both young people and adults that come through the justice system with a speech, language or communication need that's possibly not been identified, and that can have quite a detrimental effect on their process through the system and their sort of interactions in the community and engagement in community programmes and support that's on offer. So at the minute there's no sort of real links with any local speech therapy services, but that's something that potentially as a service we can look into.
I think it might be worth pointing out now, and I'm going to ask them both to explain it a little bit better in a second, but starting from February the 1st, as a custody group, we're going to be starting a pilot scheme to look at everybody that we offer an assessment to in custody I'm not going to explain it. I'll let Jess, because I'm just going to get it wrong somewhere, so I'll let Jess and Laura kind of just go over it.
So yeah, we've looked at sort of training staff on how to identify both learning disability and or a speech, language and communication need. So using different screening tools. For myself, I've created an informal screening tool that we can use just to capture who's coming through custody and what potential needs they may have, and potentially how we can address these in different areas.
Yeah, so I think there's been recent research, hasn't there, about speech and language and kind of language developmental disorder and the prevalence of that. And I think in young children, I think it's about 60%, isn't it? That's quite a new diagnosis. But also learning disabilities, when we look at our numbers as a team, they're a little bit lower than what we would anticipate to see from the back of kind of research from the Bradley report. So we're looking at offering these 2 screening tools to every single person that we assess, initially for a 3-month period, just to try and see if people are kind of falling through that gap, because it might be that someone with a mild learning disability or language issues is able to mask that presentation quite well, so unfortunately it doesn't necessarily get referred to us. Once we've got that data, we'll be looking at developing further pathways and referrals onwards, but also looking at training custody staff and police staff about how they can recognise those as well.
I think there's a lot of research that a lot of, especially youth that come through the criminal justice system or expelled from school and are kind of seen as problematic within the community setting, have got difficulties with their communication, and so I think if we're doing kind of a disservice if we don't kind of look at those individuals that are coming in custody and seeing if there's any additional support that we can offer.
Do you find it hard being NHS staff in the kind of environment you're in, because it's not a typical hospital environment? Do you find it hard interacting with different teams, Dan?
No, not at all, to be honest with you. I mean, obviously it's vastly different to the normal environment you'd have as, say, for example, a mental health nurse, which I am sort of trained as. But no, I mean, it's very different, but no, in terms of interacting with different teams, no, it's a similar thing in terms of everyone's generally trying to sing from the same hymn sheet, and the police staff on the whole have a fairly decent grasp on the kind of things that we sort of trying to look out for. So obviously the environment itself is much different, but no, it's not a challenge, particularly in terms of liaising with other people. No.
I think we're quite lucky in that the relationships between our team and kind of like police and other partners is quite positive, and I think that through the training that we've done pre-COVID to kind of custody staff and investigating officers, they really do recognise the importance of the role and see how it can benefit both themselves when they're investigating cases, when we're giving them guidance, but also the individuals that are finding themselves entering into the criminal justice system, and it kind of helps support in looking at other options or offering some rationale or insight into why people may be presenting the way that they are. So generally I think the service is quite well received and is seen quite positively, really.
Yeah. I think out of the partner agencies, if I just think of us and kind of Cranston and Maiden Healthcare, we're really fortunate to work for the NHS because we've got lots of kind of information at our fingertips that a lot of the times they don't have any of that access, and so when we are making decisions, they're informed by kind of looking at people's notes and previous history and things like that. So for me, it's always been a positive to work for the NHS, even though we're in an environment that's not technically, an NHS building, not our environment as such.
Okay. I know you touched a bit on getting referrals from the police, but is there anybody else you get referrals from, or a way people can refer into your service?
We get referrals from lots of different areas, so the other agencies in custody, Cranston, might go and see somebody that has a problem with drugs, but on talking to them they've also found out they're low in mood and they've got other potential vulnerabilities, so they'll often drop in and just sort of flag somebody for us. Mountain Healthcare, they'll often see people and identify other vulnerabilities that we could address. I think, like we mentioned earlier, solicitors may flag, sometimes that's not always appropriate, and like Janine was saying, we talked to them about the reasons why potentially they don't need any further support at this time. Interviewing officers, through when they're interviewing, they may highlight concerns and come and talk to us prior to release or something like that.
Yeah, we've also got friends and families kind of can often bring through to the police and actually state that this individual has got mental health issues or other vulnerabilities that might need additional support. So family and friends of individuals that are brought into custody, they can also refer in via the police. But we also have self-referrals, so we've posters dotted around the custody suite that are kind of easy read and accessible, and it kind of outlines what we are offering and what we can offer in possibly a more accessible format, so people can self-refer for that as well.
I think we do see an increase in the rate of people that have previously had contact with L&D that then when they come into custody kind of asked to see the team again, which is a real positive, because even if they haven't, in the first interaction with the service, they haven't kind of engaged fully with outreach, but it's still in the back of their mind that service is there to offer that additional support if they want it. And I think that's the real benefit of kind of our service in comparison to a lot of other statutory services, is we don't kind of shut the door once someone's hasn't engaged once. That we see people in custody that are in custody a lot, and that 9 times out of 10 we might go and see them and they tell us to politely go away, but there might be, and we'll still continue to see that person when they come in, because there might be a point where they're actually ready and willing to engage with support. So I think that's really testament to the custody staff that they will continue to try with individuals that are kind of hard to reach and complex and challenging, because I think at some point, something will make them want to engage with support and get some help.
Can you give an example of a positive day that you've had or a negative day that you've had in custody?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to pick... I think when things go to plan, it's always a nice day. And if I just use kind of the example of kind of working with other services within the trust, so when we kind of identify someone potentially as acutely unwell, and we call that through, so we're linking in kind of with the AMP service and then with the home treatment teams and bed management, I think when that goes smoothly, it's less stressful for kind of us lot in custody. And I think the difficulty is when that doesn't go smoothly, and then there's a lot of fighting uphill with trying to kind of get your point across and trying to make people understand why you've made professional judgment calls on when you've seen someone.
So obviously sustain the obvious slightly, but obviously if you can go see someone and they've got genuine needs and whatever else, and you think you can help them basically and put things in place for them, it's an obvious thing to say, but obviously that's always a massive positive.
Yeah, I think one that kind of sticks out for me is if I go and see someone that's got a learning disability or severe autism, and although yes they've been arrested on suspicion of a crime, and that's not to say that shouldn't be investigated, it's when we can access kind of healthcare data and we understand how sensory stuff is impacting, or lights or noise or the custody environment, and how that may actually, or has done in the past, result in additional charges being pressed against that person, so assaults on police officers or criminal damage to the cell. So about kind of identifying that and maybe working with the investigating officers and looking at alternative options. And again, that's not to say that individual isn't questioned about the offence that's originally brought them into custody, but about looking at the risk that they're posing should they have a voluntary interview in their own house or at a police station at a later date, against the risks that they're posing if they're staying in custody and don't potentially understand it and the environment isn't suitable for that. So we have had quite a few cases now where we've identified that these are issues that need to be considered, or that additional support needs to be put in place in terms of interview and communication, and that's kind of been actioned on. So that individual has still gone through the process, but it's just been in an environment that is more suitable for their needs, and they've not had additional charges placed on them, which if they'd stayed in that environment could have happened.
I think a positive of that is the police being open and accepting to that and listening to what we've read and what we understand about this person. And despite the fact we may not have actually met the person ourselves, but reading up on them, speaking to their team and understanding them a bit more can help both us and the police understand what the best process is. And the police have been really receptive to it, haven't they?
Definitely.
Cool. After a bad day, how, if you ever have those, how do you decompartmentalise? So how do you kind of get over that, for want of a better term?
I think we're really lucky in our team that we all get on really well, and it is quite a tight-knit custody team that we all kind of talk outside of work. We have got that kind of open communication where if we're struggling with something. Pre-COVID, we used to do quite a lot of group outing, socialising, just to kind of not talk about work, but just to kind of get to know each other outside of work, how we cope with things, and I think that really has helped us.
No, I think it definitely has. I think you kind of stuck in a really small space with someone for a lot of hours. You need to be able to
have a bit of humour.
Yeah, there's definitely that goes on. But I think there's also kind of things like everyone's really good at identifying when they need a break, when they need supervision, when they need kind of a break generally from the custody environment. And it is kind of, we always say it's like a Marmite service, that you either like the custody environment or you don't like the custody environment. There's no windows, it can be dark at times, you don't know whether it's light or dark outside, or if you don't see any sun unless you kind of make the effort to go out. And some people kind of can thrive in that environment and can manage it, and some people can't, and I think that's fine. I think that's recognising it in yourself when you get into a point where you need a change, you need a break from that. And I think generally as a service as a whole, we're really good at kind of saying, you can, take some time out, go and I know like the girls are now going for like walks near enough every shift that they're on, just to break up the day. And I think we can allow that. We're really good at kind of saying, just take a break, just go.
And I think because we all do kind of know each other and communicate quite openly, I think even if possibly like I was struggling and I didn't necessarily know that, I know that some of these guys would be able to kind of say, look, do you know what, just take 5 minutes, I'll do this bit. And it's about that teamwork and that kind of being open and willing to accept that bit of support, really.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a hierarchy, because to do I say that as the manager, I'm not valued at all. But I think everyone appropriately can question each other, but in a very appropriate professional manner. So we'll often do kind of assessments and things like that in twos, and speak through kind of clinical decision making. And just because kind of I lead the team wouldn't make my voice louder than all the others, or my decision making correct. That everyone's got a valued opinion in the block. That's my interpretation of it. I hope everyone else thinks that.
That's mine as well. I speak on behalf of everyone.
Good.
Are you the only man, Dan?
He is our only man.
The only man.
He loves it really.
Kick off if we had another male start, really.
So I suppose my last question is, what advice would you give someone listening now who needs help, who's struggling a little bit?
I suppose just to ask that there is help there, and that there are people that can have a chat with you. And we see people that engage in full assessments with us and then don't necessarily feel ready to accept support in the community, but the fact that we've gone and spoke to them for however long it is that we have has helped them kind of formulate their thoughts and kind of made their experiences and made them feel valued for that time. And I suppose it's just that just because they're in that situation, it doesn't mean that we're going to come and judge them. Like, we're here to have a conversation to see if there's any help. We're not going to force that on people, and it's their choice. It's about empowering people, really. But just ask, and if we can help, we'll try. And if we can't, we'll try and find out where we can, point you in the right direction to get that help.
I think about kind of always keeping the door open, that, you know, even if someone engages in a full assessment and says they want X, Y, and Z, when they come out of custody and they might change their mind, that's okay. That's okay to kind of think differently once, you know, you're out of that environment. But likewise, if you didn't engage in assessment but you took a leaflet, it's still okay to call that number and to ask for that additional support. And I think if we can just plant the seed in someone's head that actually, if you're feeling hopeless and kind of like your life's spiraling out of control, there is kind of support out there. If people just start that process of thinking that there's additional help out there, that's good enough for me. We don't have to think that we can make everything better for everybody on our standards, but if someone goes from, I use the example of kind of someone that used to be an IV drug user, and then after kind of engaging and speaking to us and then kind of the outreach service, then only was smoking heroin, and I suppose to somebody who's not involved in the service, that would still feel horrendous that they're still engaging in heavy drug use, but their risk is hugely reduced by just that small step, and that's what it is. If people just need to take those small kind of baby steps, and if we can kind of help be part of that process with them, then that's great.
I think that's it for today, guys. Thanks for joining, thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. Be sure to check out our monthly podcast, and if you want to reach out, you can contact us via our Criminal Justice Liaison and Diversion Team webpage at bsmhft.nhs.uk. If you are someone who has been affected by any of the topics covered, please remember, you can access help. Information for services is listed on our website.